course, this demanded from the legislative bodies that several acts had to be enacted in a very short period of time, sometimes with a very high level of urgency. And of course, this ended up in a lot of legislation, as we will see, and legislation that has gone from trying to defend and grant benefits to private parties who could not, during these times, go to public services or could not work and had deprived of some sort of income, but also to other sort of measures that were a bit more aggressive from, of course, the exercise of rights point of view, and a few that are questionable or can be questionable from our legal and constitutional point of view. I think that the legal system has been tested up to a moment where it had never been tested before, and I think there will be still a lot of thought and a lot of a lot of thought to come out of this situation in order to fully understand and to test and to understand what happened and what are those limits. What we will be discussing here will go, in the beginning, we'll just see some sort of measures that were implemented in order to exactly trying to grant benefits to private parties and somehow make their lives a bit easier during the context of the pandemic. So we will speak about legal diplomas that have granted suspension and extension of validity terms of documents and also of procedural deadlines. We'll go into the moratorium that was granted on leases and bank loans. And then we will see two other measures that had a very specific impact on the shopping centers sector. One which is a general measure, we will go there, the exclusion from the duty of compensation for sacrifice, and then specifically a legal waiver that was granted regarding contractual obligations granted to shop users in shopping centers, and I will try to discuss a bit of what could be the impact of that specifically on the shopping center sector. Starting with the first measure that just to go through, we had right in March, there was a decree law which was approved and had several amendments ever since, which granted suspension and extension of several validity terms of documents and procedural deadlines. For example, official documents, our IDs, licenses, and even some authorizations that which validity term would expire during the pandemic, they had their validity suspended or extended. Right now, it is until the end of this year of 2021. So these documents are valid until the end of the year. And these, even some municipalities, they have had the information that, for example, construction permits would be valid until the end of the year. So this is a general law, which of course tried to simplify and to avoid running to public services that were closed during the pandemic in order to renovate specific documents. Also, there were administrative deadlines that were suspended. These deadlines that were suspended were mainly the deadlines for the private parties to, for example, submit their pleadings in administrative procedures. For example, in a licensing procedure, if there was a decision or if there was a proposal of a decision and there was a deadline granted to a private promoter to submit its pleadings, that deadline was suspended during the pandemic. Of course, this then had implications in the overall developing on the procedures, and also regarding documents and visas for permanence in national territory. They were also suspended. And this, of course, for example, with regards to golden visa procedures with the residence permit that came to it had some implications, and we had some situations like that where the applicants of those residence permits benefited from a extension of their procedures, and there were some specific orders which are still valid that clearly say that they are regular in Portugal while these procedures are being carried out. The final balance of these measures is, of course, we had benefits to private citizens, and I believe that there was no other way of doing this. There had to be this sort of suspensions and extensions. We didn't even talk here about the judicial deadlines. That's they were all also suspended during specific times. But of course, we have an impact on the decision-making procedures of the public administration, on the overall deadlines. Procedures tend to sometimes take, as we know, take some time to be decided. Of course, this has an impact, and we are going to suffer from it as well, because there was some additional delays, and now it's time to go and try to recover that time. But this, of course, had implications in all sectors, of course, on the real estate sector, due to the administrative procedures that are involved in all the construction licensing procedures. So this is based just to have a general idea of one specific measure with an impact in this sector, and that had to be adopted during the pandemic. Then we have the moratorium on leases and bank loans. Here we had two sorts of moratoriums. So moratoriums for the payment of rents. So this was basically for all of those who were not able and were delayed in paying rents. There was a specific moratorium that was granted during the period of the COVID. And then we had as well a moratorium on bank loans. This specifically for financial operation leases, and as we will see, for individuals regarding credits for permanent own housing. These, just one note is that these legal diplomas that have granted these moratoriums, they had a lot of changes, a lot of amendments. The rent moratorium decree law had, for example, 6 amendments. The bank moratorium on loans and financial or operational leases had 9 amendments up until now. And of course, this makes it sometimes difficult to fully understand and follow and understand the current versions of the law and the current the current version and the current provisions that are applicable. Even for us, sometimes that is who deal with the law on a daily basis, that can be hard. So it is, of course, even harder, I believe, for those who do not have this expertise or are not used to dealing it. But of course, we also understand it during this context, but it's a problem that we face. Even for us, sometimes it's hard to understand the version currently in force. So regarding rent moratoriums, just a general overview, as I was saying, provided certain requirements are met, these decree laws determined that the beneficiaries could defer the payment during a certain period of time. Regarding bank moratoriums, there was a prohibition of total or partial revocation of credit lines and loans, an extension of loans, and other sorts of extensions, making it for easier during this period of the pandemic for the families to cope with their financial obligations. Most of these measures applied until the 30th of September. Some will apply until the end of 2021. So the real problem that we raise, we believe, is that the real problem should be starting now. And specifically, what could be the consequences of the end of this moratorium regime. And this will depend, of course, a lot on the sector that is involved specifically. And of course, now we are also talking about some sort of debt restructuring requests right now in the post-pandemic period, and let's see how the financial sector will deal with it, the receptivity to those kinds of requests, in order to understand what will be the outcome of these moratoriums, because things are now going to start to be to have to be paid. So of course there is a big question mark about what will happen now, and what if the real problem will start exactly now. And then we move into the measures that are a bit more specific about that could have a more specific impact on the shopping center sector. First, there was a provision in the law, in the Portuguese legislation, which is a general provision, and this will be linked to the other measure that we will talk about right away. Which is a measure that determines the exclusion of compensation for damages resulting from acts regularly adopted by public entities when acting in the exercise of powers attributed by public health and civil protection legislation or in the framework of the state of emergency for the purpose of prevention and fight against the COVID-19 pandemic, which constitutes a force majeure for this purpose. I'm sorry for this somehow long explanation, but it is a free translation of what is in the law to explain the complexity of this regime and the implications that this has, because there is a general principle in Portuguese law, which is that those who are affected in a very special and particularly harmful way should be compensated for that, for being affected in that way. And what this general provision adopted was that there was an exclusion of this compensation for damages in this case, but only from acts adopted regarding public health and civil protection legislation or in the framework of the state of emergency. So this is basically a measure that prevents that due to specific measures that aimed to avoid the dissemination of the virus, for example, closing restaurants or closing stores to avoid that people would gather and the virus would spread. These could be the kind of measures that could be into this provision, and regarding which those who would be affected could not claim for damages, for compensations for damages. Not as we view it, not regarding measures adopted in order to avoid economic consequences of these measures. I know it is there's a thin borderline. That's why this makes the link to these specific other measures that we will speak about now, because this is a kind of measure that acted regarding economic effects of measures adopted to avoid the dissemination of the virus. And it's not a measure, it's not closing the stores in order to avoid the dissemination of the virus. So what we say is that the previous provision that we talked about would include only these measures aiming specifically to avoid the dissemination of the virus, but not regarding these measures, saying that if, as we will explain, if we understand that this measure is doubtful from the constitutional point of view, it could, from our view, the provision that prevents the possibility of claiming compensation for damages would not apply in this case. So regarding this specific measure, what is in question here? Typically, we have the agreements which are entered into between the shopping center owners and the shopping users of those shopping centers, have a two-tier structure. So they establish a minimum monthly remuneration and then a variable remuneration. This is in very simple and general terms. And then a variable remuneration, which is determined based on a specific percentage of the sales. So in very general terms, there is a minimum remuneration, which is will also be paid to the shopping center owner. And then if this percentage of sales exceeds that minimum fixed amount, then it's this variable remuneration that will be paid and not the minimum monthly remuneration. The measure that was adopted by the parliament, it was not a measure adopted by the government itself, it was by the parliament, exempted the shopkeepers from paying this fixed remuneration and only, of course, the variable remuneration, which meant that since we know that shopping centers, in many cases, many of the stores, not all, but many of the stores were closed, this meant that the shopping center owners, in many cases, were not paid during this time, because there was no amount of variable remuneration, or if there was, it was a very low amount. So this, of course, had a very big impact on the shopping center owners, and during all this time of the pandemic, and of course raised and raises several issues that can be claimed in this regard. For 2021, the state budget law has amended this provision, and only the minimum monthly remuneration is to be reduced proportionally to the reduction in monthly sales, but up to the limit of 50%. So at least 50% is always guaranteed. So there was this change in the law regarding this specific provision, but there are still several issues of proportionality, of equality, of violation of private property that can be raised. And this is exactly the type of issues that we understand that can still be raised, even if we have that provision that excludes compensation for damages in these cases, because this is regarding economic effects of the pandemic and not a clear measure that is intended, that is adopted regarding for public health reasons. So this is a very, of course, in general explanation of the measure that was adopted, and that we understand as having been going into a more and more some sort of aggressive type of measures that were adopted by in this case by the Parliament, with a big impact on this specific sector of shopping centers. Final comments regarding these regulatory changes. We have, as explained, a legislative pandemonium created due to several and multiple legal regimes adopted with an immense number of amendments, and sometimes it is difficult to truly assess and determine which is the legislation applicable. There was really a lot of legislation enacted during this period of time with implications in several sectors. So it is sometimes be quite hard to understand what is the applicable version of each piece of legislation. And of course, the big question that we raise right now, which is what will be the new normal, especially and considering the last example that we gave, in terms of interference of the state within relations between private parties. Because what happened with the legislation that we explained regarding shopping centers is that the state itself had an intervention regarding the contracts that were entered into between shopping center users and the shop users themselves. So the question raised here is what is the new normal, and what will be the limit to be accepted regarding this interference in the contracts that are entered into between private parties. Of course, the pandemic was a very specific situation, a very specific and particular context, but we need to be aware, we need to be attentive, we need to follow up quite closely what will be, if there are legal actions, what will be the outcome and what will be the application and the interpretation of several of these provisions, in order to understand and to test these limits and to understand what will come out of this new legislative context that we have. So I believe, as a final note, that we can say that the crisis always creates opportunities, and also always give us a different insight and a different perspective over our reality, in this case over our own legal system. So I think that this will be the big question coming out of this pandemic, is to understand how we'll come out of this, how we'll now deal with this legislation that was enacted, and what will the balance that we will make out of all these measures that were adopted. Thank you very much. And of course, I am available for any sort of questions that you may have on this subject.
Diana, I was interested just to pick up with you, and I don't know if you've got a view on this, but obviously there was a huge amount of government support across Europe, but also in Portugal coming in. As that unwinds, is that going to create more of a, more, is that a kind of issue for now, or is that storing up issues for sort of 2022?
I believe there is some sort of question mark on what will happen from now on. And of course, it will also have to deal a lot on how, for example, regarding the moratorium regime that we explained, there will also be lots of question marks now on how the financial institutions themselves will deal with the outcome of this sort of moratorium and regimes in order to try to help out, because the question now is, after this, how will the amounts be paid now that the moratorium regimes are over? So I think it will be a question, yes, definitely for 2022 to understand how it will happen, and it will have to be attentive, and we'll have to adopt some accurate measures, I would say, and to try to see how the whole system will develop.
I mean, I was interested by what you were saying about shopping centres, and also the future, I guess, in terms of how much regulation there's going to be from government. I mean, what's your sense of that going forward, Diana? What do you think the new normal is going to look like?
Well, we have two things that one is the measure that I explained and talked about, which we'll see what will be the outcome of potential legal actions that have been started. So let's see what will be the outcome and how the specific situation of this legislation will be dealt with. But that's one thing. The other thing, of course, is looking at shopping centers and looking at how they will come out after all this situation. And of course, if there are someone in the sector to add something to this, but from what the conversations we have and the feedback that we have from clients, the reaction right now is being quite good. Shopping centers have turned to be not only a place to go shopping, but have much more than that. And the idea is to develop that and to continue creating those atmospheres that shopping centers can be. And also, although understanding that online market can be talked about as not being friendly to shopping centers, truth is that that is not so true, and that the online is being used, is helping this sector, and is being developed, and is allowing for new models to come out. So I believe that this will be a way forward, and this will be something that this sector will definitely rely upon, and to come out in a stronger way, as we all want after this pandemic situation.
Great, Antonio.
Yes, we are now in Portugal with a budget discussion, and we are on the edge of having a budget or not having a budget. Yes. Hopefully next weekend. But if hopefully everything sets, and if we are keeping on this budget, what do you see as major impacts for real estate? Is there any news that you want to share with us during 2022 and regulatory issues coming in front?
It's still early, trying to understand exactly all that is being
happening,
because we know that there are several negotiations going on. Let's hope that regarding many of these measures, that there could be specific measures trying to tackle and to regulate specifically these issues, trying to cover the situations and the main impacts that could come out. But I would say that we would need to stabilize a bit more the proposal in order to have more clear views on what will be the impact for 2022.
There's a question actually come in from Jose Pedro. Thanks very much for that, which is thank you for the presentation. Is there any perspective of potential regulation of shopping centre lease terms as for other sectors? So I don't know whether you've got a kind of view on that, Diana.
We don't have as for the moment, we don't have any specific insight on that. But of course, it's something that we will be attentive, and if there is anything, we can signalize. But up until the moment, we don't have specific news on that.
Okay, that's great. So I'm sure you will be able to come back on that, Diana, as soon as we get any news.